Well, we are roughly a month from the National Football League draft in Detroit. So the Big D is drafting. I don't know what we're doing. NFL draft, dynasty draft. Heck, we might draft kick returners for all we know on the Big D podcast. Before I bring in Jesse, please subscribe, like, and share the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page. See all my content. I could be running a 5K, drafting, baseball, March Madness. Thank goodness I haven't been more upset to.
You do a lot of stuff on this podcast. That is for sure.
Also, check out the Big D podcast for all the audio listeners, Spotify and Apple. So, joining me from about as far as you could in the continental U.S., the Great Pacific Northwest, Jesse Moeller. So, Jesse, how far of a plane flight would it be from your area in Washington to my area in Southwest Florida?
I think it's about. We did this a few years ago because we went to Jamaica, so we stopped off in Miami. It was about a 7-hour flight for us from SeaTac down to by the Miami area. It had some good Cuban food, so that was nice. But yeah, it's a long flight. Like it's a whole day right there. Let me tell you what.
Yeah. I mean, you're better off flying. I mean, don't the Seahawks and Dolphins play each other this year?
I think so. I'm not 100% sure. I'm in too deep into the rookie stuff to remember the schedule at this point, but it's entirely possible.
Yeah, because I think I remember Miami started the season. I think it was Adam Gase's first game, and the Dolphins traveled like 6.5 hours to Seattle.
Yeah, it's not a fun flight. Like we are kind of in our own little isolated area up here, so I kind of feel bad for the East Coast teams. We're like, all right, Miami, you're gonna go to Atlanta. It's a few hour flight. It's like, no, you're going to Seattle. It's like that's a whole day journey. That's not fun for anybody.
Well, don't the Seattle Mariners always lead or usually lead MLB in terms of flying miles? Because, especially now, because you play every team. Like, you imagine the Mariners play the Rays, Angels, and Red Sox on a 3-city road trip.
Yeah, it's rough. They do the miles like you're talking about, and the Mariners will win by a couple thousand each year. Like it's not even close. And like the A's just moved to Vegas, so that's even farther. So that's more a little extra flight for them even more. So it just got a little bit worse. So it is what it is, unfortunately.
Hey, the good news is at least the Mariners aren't playing and didn't play in Seoul or won't play in London this year.
Yeah, they've done the Japan thing in the past couple of years, like where they like Ichiro's last year with the Mariners, they did that. But yeah, they avoided it this year, so they got lucky.
So, in terms of drafts, I mean, it's never too early to talk dynasty or NFL draft, Jesse. So, obviously, we're a month from the NFL draft in Detroit, and everybody likes offense. So, whether it be quarterbacks or wide receivers, this NFL draft has got plenty of both. I mean, what do you like about this draft?
All of the skill position players. Like the one thing I like about the wide receivers is it's the top three and then it's everyone else, but that depth goes for like 15 wide receivers deep. So that's the thing. It goes incredibly deep. And the quarterbacks, like we have potentially 5 going in the first round. That's exciting. Like that's really where the premium for fantasy is. I know running backs, you can make the case for like 20 running backs to be that everyone. It's kind of just like a whatever class, but the depth at the wide receiver pitch position is the thing that stands out by far of everything else. Like there's just so much talent at the wide receiver position. And that's why we're seeing projections where we might see the most wide receivers drafted ever in the first 3 rounds that we've ever seen in the NFL draft. Like that's how much depth is at the position this year.
I mean, be honest with you, if you discount the first 3 guys, even the guys going in the late teens, early 20s would have been top 10 guys 2 years ago because you think, or last year, because you think of last year's class, no wide receivers are taking the top 19. And then boom, 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 boom.
Mm-hmm.
4 wide receivers went back to back to back to back. I mean, your Seahawks took Jackson Smith and Jake Muff. The Chargers took Quentin Johnson. The Ravens took Zay Flowers. And then the Vikings took Jordan Addison.
Yep.
And be honest with you, I think the first 6 wide receivers this year might be better than all of them.
Yeah, it's like we're gonna see, like you're talking about, when that basically around pick 16 is probably where that 4th wide receiver is gonna go, between like 16 and probably 22 or whatever. But like those tier of guys are very similar to the tier we had. I know everyone loved Jackson Smith and Jig, but the NFL did not feel the same. Like They love these big three wide receivers compared to last year. Like they love them so much more. They're talking top 5, top 10 picks. Like when we push it into the late first, it's a different quality of player. So I think we're seeing a lot of those guys in this draft where we can see 6 to 8 wide receivers in the first round, like you're talking about. Like that's just like as a fantasy analyst, like I don't know what else you would want. Like that's ideal right there.
I mean, how about the well, to most experts, the number one guy, Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, they're all 4 guys who I consider to be can't who I've seen enter the NFL as wide receivers who I would consider can't bust material. Calvin Johnson, Julio Jones, Jamal Chase, this guy. That's how good Marvin Harrison is.
Yeah, I think if you look back at like the best prospects that come along the time, everyone loves Marvin Harrison Jr. and for the right reasons. Like he's a legacy prospect, highly touted prospect, and does everything you want. The one guy that is in that group that gets discounted is Amari Cooper. He was an incredible prospect, went top 10. He just did not live up to the billing. But if you're looking for actual prospects, Amari Cooper belongs in that tier of the truly elite prospects. He's right there. And then we have another guy, Malik Neighbors, who would be basically consensus wide receiver run in any other season except like the Jamar Chase year. Like he would be the wide receiver one. That's how good of a prospect he is too. So it's like these little wide receiver prospects are freaking incredible this year.
Who does Marvin Harrison Jr. remind you of?
It's kind of tough because he's an individual player, and some people will say his dad, and that's kind of like the cheat because that's his legacy name. But he doesn't have like the truly like the high end Calvin Johnson athleticism. Like we're not talking about that. I think Neighbors is closer to that. But like actually Harrison reminds me a lot of Amari Cooper as a player and the way he wins. I just think he's a better version where he's more consistent. Like you could put him outside, you could put him inside. He's going to win. We saw Matt Harmon release his information on him. He's like the highest double teamed wide receiver that he's ever like graded. And like the grading prospect, he's the only guy to get above 70% win rate. Like that's really good stuff. And it just showed you how much defenses keyed in on him. And it honestly did not matter. That's how good he is. He consistently wins, does everything you want. So like, as far as like a production profile comp, I really like Amari Cooper myself, just because the way they were coming out is very similar. I just think he's going to more likely live up to the expectation we thought of Amari Cooper coming out. But like, I see the similarities between those two guys a lot.
Could he have a little? I mean, could he have a little Larry Fitzgerald maybe?
I think if you're looking for Larry Fitzgerald, that's more Rome Odunze. Like, I think that is more who that guy is. Because, like, the thing with Fitzgerald is he wasn't the best athlete. I know he was a good athlete, and he's kind of got knocked for it a little bit. But he wasn't this premium, like, elite tier of athlete. So I think he slots closer to that Larry Fitzgerald type of player that you're talking about, where he's just the guy's awesome. He consistently wins, and because he doesn't run a 4.3 flat 40, people are like, he's not fast enough. I'm like, dude, Larry Fitzgerald was awesome coming out, and he had a ridiculous production profile. Went 3rd overall in the draft. People forget he was so freaking good. But yeah, if he has I could see him having a career like Fitzgerald where it's that good. You're just like, man, Marvin Harrison Jr. is awesome.
And then Malik Neighbors from LSU. Let's see. The first 2 wide receivers to go in this draft. Ohio State and LSU. Wide receiver you and wide receiver you. Shocker, right?
Yeah. Neighbors is awesome. He's just like, you watch the tape and it's like he lights your eyes on fire. That's how much acceleration and speed comes off the tape when you watch him play. You're like, this dude moves differently. And you watch him do things, you're like, guys should not be able to move that fast to do those things. And it's not fair, especially when you line up in the slot. Good luck to a slot corner trying to guard this guy in the slot. It's impossible. You're not going to be able to win him. He's just too fast. He's too aggressive. He's too violent, and he just consistently wins. So he's awesome too. He's just a different type of player. And I think that's kind of like with this wide receiver class, those big 3, and we can talk about Rome Odunze in a second. They all win differently. So it's more just like whatever flavor of wide receiver you prefer. Like you could make the case for any one of those guys, I think.
I'm not saying Malik Neighbors, but there's a guy in Seattle who sort of reminds me of Malik Neighbors, DK Metcalf.
Yeah, he's not as big as Metcalf because Metcalf's just huge. But yeah, I like people talked about Jamar Chase and Malik Neighbors, that kind of comp, because they're very similar size and they're both like physical freaks and that thing. So like you're talking about the pure freak test, that's Malik Neighbors. He's the guy that you're like, holy smokes. He didn't test at the combine. If he would have blown the doors off of it. But he's such a high prospect. He's like, I don't need to. And newsflash, I would have done the same thing. If I was Malik Neighbors, I'd be like, why do I need to test? I want to be a top 5 pick. It just doesn't do me any good. So no thanks. So yeah, he's awesome. And I love Malik Neighbors too.
And then Roma Duse, I mean, how good was Roma Duse with Washington this year? It seemed like every time the Apple Cup, fourth down, everybody in the stadium knew who was getting the ball. Roma Duse.
He's he's the guy that seems to be the third of that tier, and I don't know why. He's personally in my wide receiver too. Like he's the prototypical. We talk about Larry Fitzgerald. Like you could put him on the X, let him just be out there, and he'll consistently win. And we saw this with like Matt Harmon's Green Christmas tree of routes, where everyone's kind of coming on board on Roma Dunze now. Where 2 months ago I said he was my wide receiver too, and I got blasted because of it. And I was like, no, dude, he's just really good, and he consistently wins. And like as a quarterback, he's going to be your best friend because he consistently gets separation, consistently wins, doesn't screw up stuff, and he's always open. So like, and he's a big body wide receiver on top of it too. And he's plenty fast. I know he ran track in high school. Like he's got speed. And I know people will say he's not a 4.3 guy. Oh no, he ran like a 4.4 something. Like that's fast. That's more than fast enough. I just think like I will hammer this home. These three wide receivers are like incredible. If you're doing rookie drafts, like getting any one of them, I'd be thrilled to get any one of them this year.
Yeah, I think Roman Duse reminds me a lot of Keenan Allen. It seemed like whether it was Phil Rivers or Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen was always that third down receiver with the Chargers.
Mm-hmm. I just think he's a more explosive version of Keenan because the knock on Allen was the lack of athleticism. So like you'll hear people comp him to Devontae Adams, and that is like a terrifying comp because Adams is one of the best wide receivers we've seen in the past like 2 decades, right? But like he's that mold of player because he's more athletic than Keenan Allen. So people will be like, well, he's not the Keenan Allen, but yeah, like you're talking about, he consistently wins like Keenan Allen does, 100%. Like the guy's just a good football player. And it would not shock me if we look back in 5 years, he's the best wide receiver out of this bunch. Like he's that good, and he deserves to be mentioned with the other 2 wide receivers.
To all three of these wide receivers going in the top 10 because I think unless these quarterbacks go off the board, boom, 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 I think all three of these wide receivers are going in the top probably 11.
Yeah, I think that's the cutoff point, like we talk about, because those teams all need wide receivers. Like newsflash, not enough teams have wide receiver. Like we talk about the Cardinals, they don't need a wide receiver. Heck, even the Bears at 9, they could still use another wide receiver because they have Keenan Allen, but he's older on a 1-year deal. So if you bring Roma Dunze there, or if he goes to pick 10, the Jets, that'd be a lot of fun. Like any one of these guys going to these spots, the one spot that does worry me is the Giants, just because it's such a disaster of an organization right now. But you could flip it by saying whoever goes there is going to get 150 targets as a rookie. Like you could talk yourself into that. So I don't think it's the best thing in the world, but ideally I'd want them in other spots of the Giants.
Yeah, I think New York might be battling for the number 1 pick this year, honestly, especially in that division. I mean, bad offensive line. Daniel Jones coming off torn ACL. I think we both love the head coach. The problem is you might have the worst roster in football. I mean, yeah.
It's rough. Have you seen their skill position talent? It's so bad. I'm like, Darren Waller's possibly retiring. Like you have Devin Singletary, who I like, but he's just a guy who can do things nice offensively if he's part of a better piece. If he's the main part of your offense, it's not good.
Who's New York's number 1 wide receiver right now?
Oh, Darius Slayton or Jalen Hyatt. Like it's not good, folks. I'm sorry, Giants fans, but I was looking at that roster and I was like, yeah. And then they trade their best player in Brian Burns on top of it too. So it's like, or sorry, no, they traded for Brian Burns' defense. So their defense is going to be a little bit better, but their offense is what worries me. It's like that offense is just a chasm and needs talent all over. So just draft linemen, draft wide receivers, just get all of them this year for them.
I mean, who's the tackle from Alabama the Giants drafted? Like he's bad.
Well, they have one guy who's really good, and I'm blanking on his name. There's like one guy that they have that's like a legit good tackle. But are you talking about Andrew Thomas or the other guy? Because I'm trying to figure it out.
The other guy.
It is, who is his name? It is, it's like Jermaine Elomenor. I really don't know much about this guy, but he's the starting tackle. Yeah, it's like they have running at guard. They got Michael Schmitz, like junior at center. And it's rough. And then the crazy thing is they spent 4 first-round picks on this line in the last 5 years. They have basically nothing to show for except Andrew Thomas. Like he's like their one good lineman. They've been really bad and just got unfortunately unlucky with these picks. And it's just, you kind of see what happens if you miss early in the draft a bunch. Of the Giants have done that a lot.
Well, then how about the rest of the first-round wide receivers? I mean, Brian Thomas from LSU has got big play abilities. And then we saw what happened when Justin Jefferson went in the 20s a few years ago. Might be the best wide receiver in football. Jamar Chase will have something to say about that.
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, he's really good. And it's not just Brian Thomas. There's another guy who's very similar production profile. It's like AD Mitchell out of Texas. Both these guys, if you're looking at for analytically, their production profiles kind of suck. Because Brian Thomas had the really big last year, but besides that, it wasn't good. And AD Mitchell's just profile overall isn't good. But if you watch the tape on these guys, you're like, these guys are first round talents. They're very good wide receivers. And they're kind of the afterthoughts on both of those schools because Mitchell was paired with Worthy at Texas. Brian Thomas paired with Malik Neighbors at LSU. So they're kind of the second of the running mates, but they're very good guys. And they have the ability, like you're talking about with Jefferson, to develop into much more at the NFL level. Now, obviously, like the Jefferson thing would be crazy for any one of these guys to hit that because I don't think they're complete wide receivers like that. But overall, yeah, they have the potential and upside to significantly be better than their profile was in college.
And then don't forget Xavier Worthy breaking the 40-yard dash record at the combine. Who's the guy from Oregon? Troy Franklin, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. He's a guy that people were really upset with how he ran the gauntlet drill because it wasn't smooth, but like he's going to be a deep threat. I think he's a lot of fun. A lot of these guys profiles deep threat, like Brian Thomas profiles as a deep threat too. So him and Troy Franklin, if an offense needs a deep threat, and by the way, NFL offenses love deep threat, so these guys will probably go drafted behind because of it. Xavier Worthy is another deep threat. He's just like I've heard talk of him getting comped to the Dolphins at pick 21, and that just sounds like that's just absurd because how are you going to cover that much speed in the offense? So if they go that route, it's like good luck defenses because you are not going to be able to cover all three of these guys. But yeah, they're all really fun prospects. And that's only the three of those guys. There's like 5 or 6 more you can talk about potentially going in the first round that are really good wide receivers too. So that just shows you how deep and talented this wide receiver group is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying he'll be this year's Cooper Cup or Puka Nakua, but how about Land McConkey from Georgia?
Yes, he's very good. I think Georgia's weird, right? Because they haven't had a 1,000-yard wide receiver in the past like 30 years. It's just not what they do offensively. They've always ran the ball. They do that. Brock Bowers got really close, but he missed it. He got like 952 yards. It's just they're deep. That's not how they build their teams. They're not a big passing ball. And you see the quarterbacks ever since like Stafford, it's just been a bunch of guys that are just kind of also ran in the NFL. They're not great. So that's not really how Georgia builds winning programs. And by the way, they're one of the most successful programs of all time, right? But yeah, speaking of Lad McConkey, he's just fascinating. He gets open, he wins. Probably going to be a slot plus player who can play inside and out, mainly out of the slot. But you watch his tape and you're like, yep, this guy's a pro. It's like he's really good. He would consistently wins, and as an NFL team, I would love that on my squad.
Wait, are you thinking when I'm thinking big program that doesn't like throwing the ball, but the pros always seem to do well in the NFL. Are you thinking Roman Wilson?
Yeah, Roman Wilson's another one. Roman Wilson's interesting, right? He's smaller and like the way he plays reminds me of Hines Ward. He's tough as nails, physical, loves run blocking, and that's the Harbaugh like imprint left on him. Like the dude is a dog in the run blocking too. So even though he's a smaller wide receiver, he will get after it in the run game. So that's a plus because like he's like I don't know if he's going to be that good on the outside. I think he's more like a slot receiver like Lad McConkey, but the dude's tough as nails. He knows how to consistently win. We saw at the Senior Bowl, he was cooking fools all day. Like he's a good route runner. It's just that offense, right? Like you're talking about. They didn't have them pass a lot because they didn't need to. They were so good on the lines. It's like, why trust our quarterback when we could just absolutely demolish you up front with a running game? So it's like, you know what? Roman Wilson, do your thing. We'll give you some targets, but overall, just get after it. Like, reminds me it profiles similar to what San Francisco does, right? They don't need to pass the ball a lot. They got skill players all over the place, but it's like, you know what? We can just ground and pound you to death. So why not go that
route? How much you want to bet Roman Wilson ends up one of these playoff teams late in the second round? I'm like, of course he ends up. You imagine he ends up with the Buffalo Bills. I'm like, of course he ends up with Josh Allen, right?
Mm-hmm. You could do that. There's a lot of teams you can talk yourself into with Roman Wilson. Like he will fit and do what NFL teams love, and he's not going to make mistakes. And that's another key. Like guys that don't make mistakes can get the job done. You can fit in a lot of places, and there's a lot of teams overall in the second and third round that still need these guys. And just because he's not like a tier 1 NFL prospect does not mean he's not going to be a good NFL player. So I think that's kind of the thing where we're like, oh, he's a third round pick. It's like, yeah, but if he goes to a good position, like if he goes to the Chargers around 3, right, he fills that need. They have kind of a slot, even though they have Quentin Johnson. Like, sorry, Quentin Johnson. Like, I think Roman Wilson's going to be on the field, so they got to figure that out. But they need people. So you go there, you put him in, and all of a sudden he's an impact guy for you day one, and you're looking at your roster a year later, you're like, yeah, Roman Wilson's good.
What team or teams do you think need to take wide receivers in this draft?
So if we're starting in the late first, like Kansas City needs a guy. Kansas City needs a big body guy who can stretch the field. They have Hollywood Brown who's going to stretch the field, but he's more going to be inside and outside. He's not your prototypical X wide receiver. Buffalo needs a guy to replace Gabe Davis that's going to stretch the field. So you'll notice a lot of these guys match up with like the deep threats. We're talking about A.D. Mitchell. We're talking about Brian Thomas Jr. You can see them going there. Troy Franklin's another guy. Carolina desperately needs multiple wide receivers in that group. New England's another team right in the early second. They need multiple wide receivers. Arizona's another team as well. Arizona's wide receiver core is awful right now. It might be the worst in the NFL. You could go down the list. Tennessee needs another wide receiver. Like, there are so many teams that they might have one or two wide receivers, but it's really hollow after that. Like, you could make a case for a bunch of these. Vegas needs another wide receiver. Indianapolis, like, there's so many teams where you're like, they need a wide receiver. So, really, once you get to about Indianapolis at pick 15 in the first round, it really is like once you clear past those big three, that's where it's like, all right, this team can take a wide receiver. Then you can go to Pittsburgh. Rams need another guy. Miami needs a slot guy. Heck, even like Philadelphia needs a third guy. So like you go down the list and you can make a case for so many of these guys, which is why I think we'll see so many different wide receivers going around one.
I'll tell you one team that won't be taking a wide receiver. Your Seahawks.
I would hope not. I would hope not. I get it. I love wide receivers. And I mean, sure. If somebody like follows you, if you have Rome Odunze following you right there in that middle round first, it's like, dude, just take them and just go ham with the offense. But yeah, they have other needs on that team that they need to build up. So I hope they don't take a wide receiver this year. As excited as I was last year, I'm like the opposite of the spectrum this year.
Who has been? I mean, this isn't really a rookie question, but which wide receiver do you think has been the winner of the offseason so far?
So it's a guy that's like gained a ton of value. And it's for me personally, when I was like going into rankings, I didn't know like diddly nothing about this guy. For me, it's Ricky Pearsall. And it's the guy out of Florida he's a fifth-year guy. He went to Arizona State. He played with actually J.D. Daniels at Arizona State, transferred to Florida. He's been with Anthony Richardson. He's similar to Ladd McConkey, except he's a technician. He makes big plays, consistently wins, can play inside or out. So I like him a lot as a big winner. When I was doing my rankings, he's like my wide receiver 6 in rookies. And I think he's like a massive winner because going in the process, I didn't know much about him. And then I watched his tape and I was like, holy smokes, this guy's really good. Like he does a lot of things you want. So if I'm looking at like my rankings or guys that I think are big winners, I would say he's a big winner too. And then you could talk about maybe like Jalen McMillan, the slot player out of Washington's another big winner. There's guys, and probably the third guy is Javon Baker out of University of Central Florida. The guy that transferred from Alabama is that big body contested catch threat. He's the one that's gained a ton of steam in the offseason. So I think those are kind of the three guys that have come out of nowhere to solidify themselves to be in those middle round picks.
And if you want a veteran wide receiver who's won the offseason, I'll take Christian Kirk because he'll be the number one option in Jacksonville right now. And I'm not just saying it because, I'm a Jag fan. Because you think back 2 years ago, Trevor and Kirk were great. I have no idea what to expect from Gabriel Davis. Hopefully he runs 9 routes because that's what he's going to be doing.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, I think he's a big winner. You could talk about a lot of these guys, right? Like you could say, Pickens is a big winner, even though like the quarterback upgrade is kind of an interesting one. Or you could say someone like Mike Evans is a big winner because he keeps the quarterback who he was really good with. You could look at it that way. Or you could talk about like Kirk, like you're talking about. I think Kirk's like an undervalued asset in Dynasty just in general because he's been good. His role is awesome. He plays that slot role, which is beneficial for targets. And like their wide receiver room, they definitely need a wide receiver. So like you let Gabe Davis run all the deep routes. He catches some of those and Kirk's just living underneath and getting those PPR points we love.
Maybe Drake London because he'll finally have a halfway decent quarterback.
Like I don't think there's been a bigger upgrade than from what they were doing last year with Desmond Ridder to going to Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins is on that Matthew Stafford spectrum where it's like these guys are non-mobile and they absolutely just pepper their skill position players with targets. So we talk about like that type of move for them. It's Drake London and Kyle Pitts are probably like the biggest of the big name assets that people liked in Dynasty. Those guys are massive winners because you go from a situation where they couldn't do anything. Now they have the potential to be like top 12 at their position and be like actual impact difference making weapons. And like Drake London could go over like 1,400 yards this year. That's in his range of outcomes, which is crazy to think about because he was barely crested over 1,000. So he gets a monumental upgrade. And I think people will realize starting this year how good of a talent, how bad the situation was last year. And they'll be like, oh my gosh, Drake London's, because he's a special player.
On to the quarterbacks now. Well, I hear this Caleb Williams guy's pretty good. I don't know. I think he's good, right? He'll go 1-on-1 in a month, right?
Yeah, if anybody's taking in superflex, like if you're taking Marvin Harrison above Caleb Williams, that's a mistake. Like I get it if you have a really solidified wide receiver or quarterback room, but like Caleb Williams is like a tier of one. He's in that Trevor Lawrence, the Andrew Luck discussion of like the best prospects we've seen coming out. And I get it. People want to spin these narratives about him, but like, give me a break. The guy is a special player who can like do everything you need in script. And if you need to go out of script and he like makes these special plays outside of the pocket, do those things, like he can kind of do everything you would want from an NFL quarterback. So I know people don't want to talk about the Mahomes, but he's the closest guy kind of to that type of player that we've gotten in a long time, who's also a very successful thrower of the football too. So it's not just athleticism. It's the whole package. It's like this guy's a leader. He does everything he wants. So yeah, the Chicago Bears fans, I know they're upset about Justin Fields being traded. They should be extraordinarily happily being this gift of getting Caleb Williams because, by the way, you're all going to be a playoff caliber team now with Caleb Williams opposed to Justin Fields. So, like, it's going to be a lot of fun in Chicago with that offensive team.
I mean, even though the Bears have a defensive-minded coach, Caleb Williams is set up for success then because the Bears have got a good offensive line, really good running back DeAndre Swift, 2 veteran pros in Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, 2 productive tight ends, and the number 9 pick in the draft. Roma Duce, would you like to play in Chicago?
Yes, I think like if you want to give him another weapon, like we talked about, I think that makes a ton of sense. But yeah, this might be like I'm trying to think back of a better situation the number 1 overall prospect has gone into as far as roster construction and build. Because the Bears have been building this thing up for years and finally hit on some players. They traded for Sweat last year, and like he was an impact defensive player. So like overall, you're seeing it all come together where Caleb Williams is walking into one of the better situations we've seen in a long, long time.
He's
and by the way,
he's certainly walking into a better spot than Bryce Young did last year.
Oh God, it's about as about an opposite as the situation that you can get from him and Bryce Young. Like we thought the CJ Stroud situation in Houston was bad. Turns out CJ Stroud was that good, and the situation was actually pretty good. So yeah, I'm just really excited to see Caleb Williams in the NFL. Like I think he's just gonna be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, and there won't be any excuses if Caleb Williams bombs with the Bears because he's got everything you could want and then some.
Yeah, he's not. There's gonna be no courtesy of like the bad coach like we saw with Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville, or same thing with Carolina and Bryce Young, right? Like
he shall not be named for my team anymore.
That guy is a clown. But yeah, I think it's good. And like realistically, if Caleb Williams, like he could be like, dude, I don't want this head coach. They could probably fire Eberflus and just go get a head coach that he wants because realistically, he's more important to them than Eberflus is as his coach. So at some point, if Caleb Williams wants it, they'll like move on from Eberflus. Like that's like this is the type of player we're talking about who's can be a trend-setting player. Like you, as a team, you have to make it work with him. So you do everything in your power to make it work for Caleb Williams.
Well, then how about what most people consider the second and third quarterbacks, that being Drake May and Jane Daniels? Be honest with you, I don't know why people dislike Drake May because he's 6'4", 230, 240, huge arm, played basketball in high school. And yes, everybody was saying, well, he hasn't played enough football. Well, do you know how many salts Mitchell Trubisky racked up in college before the Bears took him? Sorry, Chicago.
Yeah.
You know how many starts Mark Sanchez got at USC before the Jets took him?
Too many. Too many. It's like
I mean, Drake May didn't play his 2020, his final year of high school.
Mm-hmm.
Was for 2022 freshman year in North Carolina. And then the last 2 years, he played with Josh Allen 22, but he didn't play with a great offensive mind or a number of great receivers.
Yeah, like he He did have Tez Walker this year, but the whole NCAA botched that situation where Tez Walker didn't show up till like week 3 or week 4 because like the NCAA just does dumb things and they screwed that whole situation up with him transferring. They thought it was illegal. It turns out it wasn't, so he should have been playing and he wasn't. It just kind of was a bad year where it's the kind of the opposite of the situation with McCarthy in Michigan, right? Where you're putting all of the weight of the world on Drake May's shoulders. In Michigan, you're not doing that with JJ McCarthy, so his level to path of success is much easier than Drake May, but it's not like Drake May was a bad quarterback. He was still one of the better quarterbacks in college football last year. He did regress from his peak year of 2022, but that peak year 2022 was some special stuff. So I get it. Like he's going on the wrong trajectory. Like you always want to see guys going up. You don't want to see them going up and down. That's not what you want to see. But like the talent and skill set, I'm with you. Like I think he's, as far as a floor, he's just much safer than Jaden Daniels. I think for fantasy wise, Jaden Daniels is a very intriguing asset, but like there's question marks with him too. So if I'm an NFL team, I prefer Drake May. But like I get it if the Commanders go Jaden Daniels because the upside we just saw last year. He was special in that Heisman campaign. The things he were doing, you're just like, okay, yeah, that's elite stuff. So you can make the case for either one, and I'm not going to be too hard on him.
Does Drake May remind you of Justin Herbert or Josh Allen?
I mean, a little bit. I don't think he's as athletic as Allen as far as like Allen's just a freak of nature, the way he moves, and like he's just big and bullies people. May isn't that physical, but he's like you look at his rushing profile, it's a very good rushing profile. And it's really one that's people gone understated, right? Because they're like, oh, he's not really that athletic. And you're like, yeah, dude, he ran for way more yards than you would expect. It's like 600 plus yards. Like that's good stuff. So he's got functional mobility, and I think he's a plus athlete. It's just people are kind of just down on him for whatever reason. I don't know if that's the narrative or it, but yeah, like you're saying, like he's in that vein of player. If he hits, he could be very huge and be a franchise quarterback for a team that desperately needs it. If it's Washington, if it's New England, or whoever trades up for that pick, right?
And then Jane Daniels. I mean, obviously, historic 2023, won the Heisman of LSU. But is this a Joe Burrow all over again, where he puts together one historic season, or is Jane Daniels potentially worthy of a top 3 pick? Because I mean, I didn't see Jane Daniels' production at Arizona State or his first year at LSU. Now all of a sudden, true, played for a great offensive mind and 79 wide receivers in Baton Rouge this year.
Yeah, it was the perfect situation for him. And to your point, like I think it's different fantasy question than it is for the NFL. I think it's a much bigger gamble for the NFL because like if you're drafting a guy that early, you're hitching your wagon to them. You're like, this is our guy. We're going to make it work. If not, it busts. In fantasy, if he gets that draft capital, he's going to be so insulated. I'm fine taking him as a top 2, top 3 pick in superflex drafts because the team's going to be that committed to getting him to win. The issue is the Justin Fields issue. It's the same issues. Holds on the ball too long, takes a ton of sacks, and puts his body at risk. Now the upside is there. Like he's not a passer that Joe Burrow was. He isn't that level of passer. Even though his efficiency and all that stuff was ridiculous last season, he's just not that good of like a passer yet. But like he has the intangibles of the Lamar of the rushing aspect too. So it's really just what's up these teams think. And like, it's so hard to tell right now because right now we're getting JJ McCarthy smoked to being the 2nd overall pick. So like, as someone on the outside looking in, you have no idea where this is going to go. It's going to be one of those 3 guys. I just have no clue which one it's going to be right now.
Wait, you mentioned JJ McCarthy, right? Because by the time this podcast is out, he might be the favorite for the 2nd overall pick because even though you can't legally bet in Washington, sorry, man. Sorry. But depending on what site you use, JJ McCarthy is like the hottest thing since sliced bread, or in your neck of the woods, fish.
Yeah, he very much is. I'm very like kind of perplexed by all this smoke coming out about McCarthy because we saw this 2 years ago with Malik Willis. We saw this last year with Will Levis where they got steamed up out of like nowhere where it's like, okay, yeah, they're going to be 1st round picks probably. And then all of a sudden you hear like the hype train building around the Senior Bowl, around the combine. And you're like, wait a second, like, is this for real? Turns out the NFL was just blowing smoke. Now, the difference with JJ McCarthy, I think he's just a better passing prospect and he offers more tangible tools than those guys. So I think it's more realistic he could be in the discussion for a top 4 pick. It's just, I mean, we're like in it. You kind of have to check your homerism and who you're getting information from, right? Because depending on who you're listening to, he could be the 2nd overall prospect. And I've seen guys like the Fantasy Points guy who runs it. He has him as his QB1. So like guys respecting the space really like him, right? And on the flip side, people were like, yeah, he's my QB5. And I'm like, dude, it just shows you how hard quarterback evaluation is because NFL teams get it wrong all the time. So don't feel bad if you missed out on these guys. Like we did this with Bryce Young last year. He was consensus quarterback 1. I had Anthony Richardson as my QB1. I probably missed because CJ Stroud's the best of the bunch, right? So we see this every year. It's just you have to be very careful who you listen to, but take all the information in and make the best choice you can because there's nothing harder than predicting quarterback success because it seems very fluky a lot of times.
I mean, and plus, we never really saw J.J. McCarthy in a lot of stressful situations. He didn't throw the ball in the second half against Penn State. Yeah, and he might make 2 or 3 tough throws a game. I mean, yeah, he made great plays against the Buckeyes. I mean, he made a great run against Washington, made some big plays against Alabama. But they won a lot of those big plays. I mean, and I also look at McCarthy, he played with a great offensive line, running game. So he only put up, 22 touchdowns his last 2 years at Michigan. When Caleb Williams put up, 93 touchdowns at USC without a great offensive line, a lot of wide receiver help outside of Jordan Addison.
Yeah, and then that's the kind of the thing you have to make. It's just the degree of difficulty for JJ McCarthy was a lot less than these other guys, and it's easier for him to succeed. So you have to determine how much of that is translatable. And to your point, he only had 10 pass completions in the national championship against Huskies. They literally didn't ask him to do a damn thing. He just could manage that game. It's the Brock Purdy thing with the San Francisco 49ers. Do enough to win. Now I'm not discounting Brock Purdy. I think he's a very good NFL quarterback, but it's a similar spectrum. It's like, all right, everything around you is so good. We just need you not to screw it up, right? As opposed to Drake May, we're talking about. It's like, dude, you got to carry this team. We need you to get us the win. So that's the entire difference with these guys. So. And this is the whole issue we have with quarterback. It's like the varying degrees of difficulty on him can be from a 2 for McCarthy, and it's a 10 if you're Drake May going against Alabama. So that's the whole difference.
Who is J.J. McCarthy's quarterback comp?
That is a tough one, and I haven't really found one I completely like. There's a couple of names of guys, but
let me see how far back do I have to go?
You can go back as far back as you want to go. We can go all the way back. I'm just I think he's a very unique prospect, and a lot of the times we don't get guys who've thrown this little amount of the time and this much weight into being this high of a prospect. Most of these guys are heavily relied upon going into the NFL. So this is the whole thing with McCarthy. It's hard to pinpoint the exact comp with him.
I've got one, even though different era, who might be sort of similar to J.J. McCarthy. And I'll give you a hint. I'll give you a hint. He played under the same coach who coached J.J. McCarthy in college.
So it would be for Harbaugh, right? So then who the heck? How far back are we going here?
Legion of Boom era.
Well, you're talking about Alex Smith?
Not Colin Kaepernick.
Yeah, Alex Smith. Yeah, that's a good one. I like that one. It makes a lot of sense, right? I think he has a stronger arm than Alex Smith, but a lot of the stuff he does and the ways he wins is very similar. So yeah, and Alex Smith, he was very much a rusher at Utah. That's the thing with Alex Smith. He was counting on his wheels more than anything else. So I think if you look back at his time as Utah, he wasn't this elite passer, but that whole draft was a weirdo, right? Because him and Aaron Rodgers were back to back. Aaron Rodgers falls to the late first round. That's how wild it became. And I just felt so bad watching Aaron Rodgers in that draft because he's just sitting there in the green room kill me. This is awful.
Top 5. 3 running backs went in the top 5.
It's a different world back then. Imagine how social media would just be burning aflame if we had 3 running backs go top 5. People would be like, "What is happening? I can't take this." Yeah, and that was only 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago. It's come a long way in the NFL, that's for sure.
Mel Kiper would have thrown his iPad down the trash dispenser.
Oh yeah, Pat McAfee would be just losing his mind watching it. It would be a wild time. I mean, I'd be here for that circus. I'd kind of want to watch it, but yeah, it'd be hilarious.
And then how about the 2 Pac-12 quarterbacks? I mean, Bo Nix and Michael Penix. Bo Nix, I think, started about the last 75 years in college. I mean, he racked up 61 starts at Auburn and Georgia. I mean, What do
Yeah.
you think of Bo?
Bo Nix is the most interesting guy because if you would have looked at his Auburn tape, you'd be like, this guy's not an NFL quarterback. Like it's not happening. And then you see him at Oregon, and they basically do a really good job, like almost better than any program, of hiding someone's weaknesses. And that's what Oregon did. And this was Troy Franklin too. Like this is why I struggle with the tape of those guys enough, is because they put them in the best position to win and really do stuff they're only good at. They're not asking them to do bad things. It's like, all right, you do this well, this is all we're gonna do. So it's Bo Nix, it's quick reads, it gets it out. It's Troy Franklin, it's like screens, or it's like go deep. Like we're gonna do those things with those guys. And yeah, they were really efficient, and like congrats to those guys for doing well. It's just I struggle with those guys immensely because like I get it, people say you're a winner, but like yeah, you have this experience, but where's the line of too much experience? Because Bo Nix has been in college for what feels like 15 years. And the difference between him and Penix is Penix has had 4 season-ending injuries. So there's a little bit of a caveat with that. It's like he kept getting hurt, kept getting hurt, kept getting hurt. He transfers from Indiana, who he had them his last year in Indiana. He had them on the borderline of being a top 10 team. There was hype around him. He blows out his shoulder. The season goes to dismay, right? He's downhill. Then he gets revitalized with Kalen DeBoer at Washington. And it's like, oh, yeah, this guy's still a very good quarterback. It's just the athleticism we thought is really just not there. So he's a statue quarterback. And it's like, all right, you're really old. What could we do? And oh, yeah, by the way, you might have the best wide receiver core in college football last year with the wide receivers they have at Washington. And he dominates. So it's kind of hard to, take the good and the bad with these guys. But like, are they worth first round picks? I mean, late first round, I guess. It's just they're old, and the trajectory of timeline with these guys, it's like, all right, if they still need to improve at this age and we're not sure about them, when's it going to happen, right? Will they be 28 when they finally hit? It's like, all right, we're starting to run up that. So that's the $1 billion question with these guys. And it's like some team will probably take a gamble on one of them, but yeah, I would feel much more confident in like round 2 or round 3 if that's where they ended up.
I mean, being in Washington, you probably saw how much did you see of Penix play in Washington?
I saw a decent amount. Like the game would be on, I'd check it out. Like, yeah, okay. Like he does a good job of like leading these guys in space. Like he completes the pass. He does a lot of good things. Well, it's just when he's under pressure, he kind of crumbles. He doesn't take sacks, but like he does bad things when he's under pressure. So like the one thing about Penix that's really good, his sack rate, like under pressure, is like astronomically good. Like he just doesn't take sacks. But like he crumbles at the same time where he makes really bad decisions. So it's kind of a good and a bad with him, where he's like, but you see him if he's like we saw against Texas, he was upright. There was no pressure. He was actually throwing darts and he was hitting guys in stride, doing things really well. And then versus Michigan, he was under constant pressure, and you saw how difficult it was for him in that game. So you kind of saw the good and the bad of Michael Penix in those 2 games of the championship run, where it's like Texas, he looks like a world beater. Michigan, he looks like maybe a backup quarterback. Like, so you kind of have to find the varied degree of, all right, which Michael Penix are we getting in the league?
Does Penix have a little too? I'm not saying because they both left him, because when Tua came out of Alabama, he was the best deep ball throw in the draft, but dealt with a lot of injuries in college. Penix, great deep ball throw, not overly athletic, but dealt with 59 injuries in college.
Yeah, that hip injury like changed Tua's trajectory of who he was as a player, because he's not as mobile as when you look at him first coming into Alabama. He could move around a lot better and do a lot of things. That hip injury completely changed who he was, and I think that kind of went undersold when he went top 5. It's like he probably shouldn't have gone top 5 at that point because he got cleared to play, but he wasn't the same player, right? And you see it kind of in Miami, like he's just not the same guy he was in Alabama, which is unfortunate. He's still a good quarterback. It's just he's not the guy you were where you had the tank for Tua first overall pick, right? It's like he's not that guy anymore. It's like, yeah, I think the similarities and the parallels in their career are actually kind of similar, where it's like injuries derailed who they were. They can still be NFL quarterbacks, but it's like what level of talent or skill are they going to be at that point? It's like we have to make that decision now.
Yeah, so what I'm guessing Minnesota. In terms of teams that need a quarterback, we know the Bears are going to take Caleb Williams. We know Washington's taking 1 and 2. The Patriots, we don't know what's happened. I think the team that fascinates me is Minnesota, because I have heard everybody say J.J. McCarthy's going to the Vikings at some point. I'm like, it's not a question of if the Vikings move up, it's a question when the Vikings move up, with 2 1s. And Justin Jefferson in need of a quarterback?
Yeah, just a little bit. And Like if the Vikings somehow they don't trade up and they land McCarthy, I think that's the dream scenario for them. I don't know how realistic that is with all the smoke we're getting on McCarthy. So I think this is the most interesting like pivot point of the draft, right? It's like if they don't trade up, they don't get McCarthy, what do they do? Because they literally traded up into the first round to get enough cachet to move up in the draft, right? But what if those teams don't want to move or it's not the right deal? So they're just sitting. And then what do they do from that point? Because they still need a quarterback. Like you can't tell me Sam Darnold's going to be the guy you want to start for a season. That's not going to end well. He's approaching almost 100 career starts at this point. We know who Sam Darnold is. So if you don't get McCarthy, then I think it becomes a like, do they really reach for a quarterback, or do they just push it off for a year and they roll with Sam Darnold and piss off Justin Jefferson to the point where he doesn't want to sign a contract? He's like, nah, just trade me, because like that's theoretically in the range of outcomes. So I think they got to find a way to get a quarterback they're comfortable in. And if that's McCarthy or if it's Drake May who follows whoever it is, like I think they need to go get that rookie quarterback and make sure, because it's a pretty good like wide receiver room. You got the tight end, even though Hawkinson's probably injured for the year. You still have the base and the talent with a decent offensive line. Like there's things that are nice around there. It's just you need that quarterback, which they had in Cousins. They obviously didn't like it. So I don't know. We'll see what happens, but I'm very intrigued to see how that shakes out.
Do you think there's a possibility you Seahawks end up taking a quarterback, whether it be at 16 or at some point of the draft?
Yes, I think they could. That early though, it needs to be a guy that they're confident enough in that could be like the face of the franchise moving forward. So like I don't think they should take a Penix or like we talk about our Bo Nix. Like I think that's a mistake that early in draft, unless they believe in the guy. And if they do take the guy that early, that's a signal to us and like everyone in the NFL, like, all right, this is the guy we're building around the future. Because they're kind of in that tweener spot, right? Where a lot of these borderline prospects would fall in the past. Like you talk about the Christian Ponders, the Jake Walkers of the world, those guys who fell like that mid-teens.
Oh God!
Yeah.
God.
On the flip side, there is the whole shenanigans, the Patrick Mahomes falling off the side of the top 10, where the Chiefs traded up to get him and they lucked out of that scenario, right? Or Justin Fields is another example of a guy that's missed so far. Maybe he could turn it around, but these guys that fall into this range usually fall for a reason. So we'll see. I don't know. I would much prefer if it's round 2 or round 3 or day 3. Like they just take a guy that, solidifies their roster, because unless they really like Sam Howell, which they traded decent capital to get him and they like him enough, I just, I don't think Sam Howell is the answer. But, it's worth the tires at that price, much more than it is spending first round pick, in my opinion.
Oh, man. I mean, this feels like one of those drafts where future's on the line, because if you don't get the quarterback right, Chicago, Minnesota, Denver, you're done. Oh, Las Vegas, because you really think Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew will win games in that division? No.
Especially when you have the veterans you do on that roster. It's like Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers are like, dude, just give us a quarterback. And like we saw Minshew, he's functional to the point where he can kind of support an offense, but he's not.
Yeah, with Shane Steichen, like he can only play under one OC.
Yeah, exactly. Like Minshew has limitations as a quarterback, and so does Aiden O'Connell. Like I know it's funny seeing the Rod Favre memes with him just because they look like doppelgangers. But yeah, like both those guys, like they're not a guy you want to be starting. That's the guy you want as like a backup role. Like Joe Flacco is playing in Indianapolis right now. You want that guy as a backup role, who they can do enough to at least support your weapons, but they're not a guy you can rely on. So yeah, ideally they need to get someone, or they need to figure it out, trade back, get more draft capital, because that roster still needs work. But Tom Klusko's out here spending $100 million plus on Christian Wilkins. So I literally don't know what the Raiders are doing. Like it's the most perplexing team where you're like, dude, you need to rebuild. He's like, nah, go spend $100 million on this defensive tackle. And I'm like, all right, I don't get it at all.
If you were the Washington Commanders, who are you taking at 2? Jane Daniels, Drake May, or JJ McCarthy?
I'm taking Drake May. I'm much more solidified in the faith that he's going to be a productive NFL quarterback. Now, if you want to shoot the upside shot with Daniels, I get it. And this is what the teams kind of have to decide, right? I think Drake May is just the safer, more proven NFL quarterback. He's younger. He kind of checks all the boxes I would be looking for NFL. I think it's a differentiating question for fantasy than it is NFL, because I'm more looking for a guy that even if they don't hit, they can still be a productive NFL quarterback. They're not terrible. Like you fall into this Trevor Lawrence range where it's like, all right, still a good quarterback. He might not be elite, but he does enough where you can actually win with him, right? if you want to take the full upside swing with Jaden Daniels, go for it. I personally wouldn't do it. I just think it's a very risky move to go on a year 5 guy who finally broke out and finally succeeded after like years of, not being the best productive quarterback in the NFL. So personally, I would take May, but if someone wants to take Daniels, go for it.
All right, Jesse, thanks for hopping on. Can't believe a whole month in the NFL draft. It'll feel like 30 minutes, more like 30 days, right?
It's going to fly by. It'll be here before we know it. But yeah, I want to thank you for having me on. I very much appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule.